This episode of Where Did the Road Go is brought to you in part by our Patreons. If you want to become a patron, go to wheredidtheroadgo.com. And now our show.
Transmission start. Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Join us as we wander off the path and explore lost history, consciousness, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, alternative thought, and much more. We are present on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Now here is your host, Soraya.
Greetings and welcome to this edition of Where Did the Road Go? This is our 5th anniversary. Our very first show was live on WVBR January 26th, 2013. And so here we are, January 27th, 2018. And I decided the most appropriate thing to do would be another UFO history show. So I have Mike Clelland and Aaron Gulyas on, and we discuss the events of 2017 with their interesting contrast on all this stuff. And we did an extra Patreon segment as well. Patreons had some questions for Mike and Aaron, so they answered those, and then we got into a little bit of X-Files and Star Trek and stuff. Runs about a half an hour, so if you're a Patreon, you'll get that this week. And I want to take a moment to thank everyone listening to this show. Whether you're listening on a podcast, live on VBR, on Dark Matter, whatever, YouTube, you guys are amazing. When I started this show, I didn't expect it to catch on. I didn't expect it to go anywhere. I wanted to talk to some interesting people. I didn't expect this. And this is possible because of all you people, because of you Patreons especially, but also everyone listening, everyone spreading the word about the show. It's been amazing. It's been really humbling and really awesome, and I'm glad people like it. And as long as people like it, I'm going to keep doing it. So hopefully we'll have another good 5 years, and hopefully in that 5 years it'll expand as much as it has in the first 5. So to sum that up, thank you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for talking about the show. Thank you for making this show possible. Also, a thanks to all my Roundtable co-hosts who have been really awesome in turning the Roundtables into something special. I am lucky to have met such a different array of people who have such an intelligent input on all of this stuff. And of course, a shout out to the Roundtable semi-regulars who also do their own podcasts. Of course, Timothy Renner's Strange Familiars, which you can find also here on the Where Did the Road Go channel on YouTube and iTunes and such. Rojan and Lobo from Project Archivist. Greg Bishop from Radio Mysterioso. Adam Sane from Conspiranormal. All of which are quality shows worth your time. And a special shout out to John Tudor, who has been an amazing help over these 5 years. And also a special thanks this week to Steve Beckett, and an extra special thanks to Eric Carlson, both who donated to us this week. Thank you for that. It is very much appreciated. All right, let's get into this UFO history show for 2017. I hope you like it. So, welcome to UFO history part, 2017. Let's do that. I'm here with Aaron Gulyas and Mike Clelland. Hi, guys.
Hello. Hi. Thanks for having us on.
And people wanted another UFO history show after we covered all of history, so figured here on the 5th anniversary of Where Did the Road Go, why not do last year?
Yes. And we're getting pretty close to the anniversary of when we started the UFO history series in general, wasn't it? February of...
It was the first week in February, yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, how interesting. But that was like 1989 or something like that, wasn't it? We've been doing it a long time.
It was 78 actually. I had you guys on as the first show in the new year, like the 3rd year or something like that for the UFO history thing, and but it feels more appropriate to do it on the anniversary date at this point, since it's probably one of the most popular shows overall that we've done, and it's
interesting.
And we have this whole series that has gone on, so. And what has happened in the last year? I mean, there's a lot of stuff that happened at the end of the year, and I always have a hard time coming up with stuff that happened earlier. Let's start with, you know what? Let's start with Stan Romanek. Yeah.
So I have met Stan. I have talked with Stan. I've actually talked with Stan, and I've met him at a handful of conferences. He was like all over the conference scene, with about 4 years ago, and I know his wife too. His wife is really wonderful, and so this is, this isn't some stranger for me. This is a real person that I. And at the same time, I know folks who know Stan and have had experiences around Stan, and so he's pretty guarded. You talk to him, and he's, especially in a conference format, and I don't think I'm saying anything that's like, but you can sense he's kind of guarded, but the people around him aren't. And so I had a set of long conversations with a handful of folks, at conferences and around, not really like I was trying to dig up, but I was more just like, what is going on? Because his story, if you take his first book, it's on one level, it's not that different from what a lot of other experiences are talking about. Right. Though he does have the video footage. There's some video footage that I have some very strong opinions on it. I'm not a video whatever. I'm not a specialist at analyzing that kind of video.
I don't think you need to be.
But I have talked to folks around him. And they've had very strange experiences around him that would be difficult for him to stage. And so there's my sense very strongly is that he's had real experiences. And the thing with the pen, I have to say, I don't know if you remember that, really annoyed me. That was right when I was sort of starting to talk about my own experiences publicly. And here was someone who had like the limelight of what it meant to have UFO contact. And he did this thing with a pen while he was being interviewed by a fellow I like and respect a lot, Peter Maxwell Slattery was doing the interview. And it is very obvious that he is pretending there's some sort of paranormal thing going on. And he kind of flips a pen into the room and he's like, what just happened? Oh, what just happened? Yeah. And he later came out with Peter Maxwell Slattery on a video event. This is well over a year later. And he told a story, which all I can do is just say what he said, and that he was told by, I'll just say, forces within the secret government he had to do something to embarrass himself, in essence, because he was getting too close and they were threatening. So he had to leave the limelight in some sort of way. So he staged this thing. I'm not going to speak to the reality of it, what really may have happened. All I can speak to is what he said. So, here, I'll just jump back a little bit. So there's a fellow named Don Daniels. He's a great guy. He does his own podcast. And he has had a very interesting personal experience. He's a very credible, he's an airline pilot. So he's a very credible guy. And he, worked for MUFON in Denver, and there's an event early on in one of Stan's books where he says that he drove to a night watch, a sky watch at a city park somewhere in Denver, where all like the UFO enthusiasts were meeting that evening, and they were going to watch the sky that night. And as he was driving to the park, he claimed that a soccer ball, sort of looked like a soccer ball, had that kind of patterning on it, kind of orb, was hovering above his car as he was driving, and it scared him. So he was going too fast. He came into the event, screeched to a halt, and the soccer ball thing hovered and then disappeared. I can't remember the exact details. But talking to Don Daniels, did a straight up investigation for MUFON, and talked to everyone involved. Everyone knew each other at the park. Everyone told the exact same story. It matches pretty much exactly what Stan had written in his book. So that's one example of something where he makes a claim that is completely backed up through other witnesses. So it's a very tricky, slippery slope. And there was also the documentary came out.
Yeah, well, that's part of what I was referring to.
Yeah,
when bringing him up. That
came out and that was available. I think that's still available on Netflix.
Probably.
I think it is. Yeah,
it's worth watching just for the weird factor alone. And then at the very end of it, anyway. So at the very end of it, they bring up the charges and if I remember correctly, the charges showed up very shortly before a working print of that documentary was about to be premiered at a festival, trying to sell it, and that was just within the weeks leading up, which is very suspicious. So yeah, he was arrested and stood trial and was, after I think over 2 years or something like that, eventually convicted of possessing child pornography. There was some wording early on in the newspaper things where he was claimed to be selling it or peddling it. I'm not sure.
What it was is he was charged with possession and with distribution, which with digital stuff basically means you left your torrent client open or something, probably.
Right.
In the end, he was just convicted of the possession. They couldn't get the distribution charge to stick. So there were two charges. One was possession and what was distribution. And he was arrested in February of 2014, and the verdict, the trial wasn't over until August of 2017. So yeah, it was a long process, as most trials like this are, as you go through lawyers and as you go through the entire arraignment process, and things grind slowly.
Yeah, see, I would disagree about the documentary. I thought it was absolutely horrible and embarrassing. Whether or not he had an initial,
that's interesting. Yeah. Okay.
Whether or not he had an initial sighting, that's entirely possible. But I think he was the type to kind of just try and make the most out of it. And like one of the things on the documentary, they're talking about the little girl he photographed at the end of this road. And after listening to the whole story, I'm like, I could totally tell you how he faked that, because it just mysteriously disappeared off his camera before anyone got a good look at it. And I'm thinking, so the picture was already taken. No one got a good look at it. And all those people were like, well, we had an experience with him. And I'm like, no, you didn't. Nope. He just scammed you guys.
He certainly may have, and actually, that was one of the stories that I talked to a lot of people about, and folks that are credible. And one of them was Alejandro Rojas, who was I think at the time the media frontman for MUFON, and he was living in Denver, and I talked to all the people who looked at it. And they all explained the same thing. Yes, they all just looked at an image on the back of a digital camera. Mm-hmm. Yes. So there was never anything printed up. There was never anything put on a big screen or anything like that. Just the image on the back of a digital camera I'm sure there could have been some fakery there, but that story is one that I talked to many people independently about. And they all, in essence, said the same thing. And they said that the picture. And it's interesting because she was actually in the documentary. There's a woman. I'm going to be cautious not to use her name. She's a wonderful, kind, sweet woman, and I've met her many times at conferences. And she claims to have had hybrid children with Stan while on board craft. Now, this sounds so far out, but I've heard plenty of other people say the same thing. And she, if I remember correctly, just noticed, went to a talk, and they sort of ended up talking to each other, and they both said something to the effect of, "I recognize you from on board a craft."
Right.
And actually, Peter Maxwell Slattery says the same thing, that he has seen Stan on board a craft. yeah, this is getting, you go way, way, way down the rabbit hole by the time you get to this point. But the thing that was very strange was most people said this little girl bore an uncanny resemblance to the woman who's in the documentary, and I actually went around and tried to play. I just was. This was at a conference in Laughlin, Nevada, and the conference was 8 days long. So by the time you're just looking for something to do, and I'm an illustrator, so I was kind of going around saying, "Here, let me try to draw this." And so I would do little forensic sketches for each person and and they would describe. So they're all in essence describing the exact same thing.
Yeah, I think this case is the Romanek stuff's been going on for so many years. I think the last couple of times we got together, we talked about him, and I still maintain that he may have had some experiences, and those may be completely legitimate experiences, but the other stuff that is sort of just obviously not legitimate, that he's admitted, he faked the pen thing, because he was being forced to, discredit himself or whatever. It's the field has always been so full of charlatans that, it's easy. You don't have to do many goofy things to get painted with that brush. And there's enough flying saucer folks out there that people move on to the next one that they don't see as flaky or mendacious, but which is sort of a shame for if he did have the experiences some of the experiences that he claims to have had. I think the stuff in the documentary about the girl or the hybrid, I'm just sort of defaulting to the hybrid, who claims to be his child, and the replicas. It's a good story. It's a good yarn. There's a lot of cool things going on with it. But if all of these stories were being told by somebody who wasn't Stan Romanek, I think there would be a lot more or a lot less sort of skepticism. But and not to take away from individuals' experiences with him. That's the tough thing about it, right? You develop relationships with people, and you get to know their story in a way that is not just them writing a book or them on a stage at a convention or them on a radio program. It's you get to know them as a person, and you talk to people, right? And you develop these relationships. And so you have a different perspective on those experiences that those of us who are watching the YouTube videos or reading the books don't have. And that's always been the trickiest thing about the UFO field and about this deeply subjective nature of the phenomenon is that, it's not like some historical thing where you can look up a law or you can count the casualties after an explosion or find any sort of other reasonable, generally accepted evidence. It's so personal, and the relationships just compound that personal nature of it and make it very difficult.
Now, I agree. I mean, it's very difficult for me too, because in one sense, I sense it in me that I want to believe him, and at the same time, I feel like I have to be extremely cautious. Quite honestly, it's like we're like in a post Edward Snowden world right now, where this is exactly what the threat is now. That it used to be that you live in El Salvador or something like that, and you get a knock on the door in the middle of the night and you'd never be heard from again. Now you get like a digital signature or something like that paints you with the brush of a child pornographer, and then that's like the fear of that I think we're all living under, in a way that we're we're living in this world where our online, where this stuff can be manipulated, and obviously can be. So, it's a haunting story. Just because of the the implications, if his claim is, if what he claims that he was set up, which is not impossible, I mean, any of us could be set up.
But you also got to consider, if I remember right, they said they found child pornography on USB keys around the house.
Oh, I don't remember that at all. Okay,
Yeah.
Yeah.
It wasn't just an internet thing. Yeah.
Okay, so I don't remember that at all.
So that would be that's beyond being set up. Plus, it's really convenient for him to claim he was set up. I don't really see him as being endangering anyone, in high up military places where they might want to take him down. It seems
yes,
like,
but that's been part of his story right from the very beginning. The people with short haircuts who are look like military types beating him up when he's on his bicycle and stuff.
Right. So, well, let's move on to Sean David Morton, which I
have no relationship to at all, and you can say whatever you want about him because I've got no So.
Which Aaron brought up just as we were starting this in relation to I just forgot his name.
Stan.
Yeah, Stan. Thank you.
The year of convictions in the saucer world. Yeah, Morton. For those of you who aren't familiar with Morton, go on the YouTubes or throw this in your Google machine and look up Sean David Morton. His appearances on Coast to Coast throughout the 90s, where he would make predictions, and his reputation as a psychic, and he claimed back in the 90s to have been the first one to investigate Area 51, and that was sort of how he got into the saucer thing. My favorite Sean David Morton moment was in 97 or 98. He was the representative on Coast to Coast of a guy named Victor who had supposedly snuck some footage out of Area 51 or an underground base or something like that, and it was some guy with his voice disguised. The rumor was, one of the rumors was that it was Whitley Strieber, and I actually went on Twitter and asked Strieber a few years ago, and he denied it. So it must be true that Strieber was faking being an alien. That's how it works, right? If you deny it, it must be true.
Right.
But Morton got into some scam stuff in the early about 2010. They were he and his wife Melissa were in trouble with the SEC. I wrote down some stuff in February of 2013. He was ordered by a judge to pay $11.5 million to the SEC as fines for shady securities fraud stuff. In 2016, he and his wife were arrested and charged with a total of like 50-some counts of various fraudulent things, basically filing fraudulent income tax returns and then pocketing refund checks that they never should have gotten. And then this year they went on trial for this. Melissa, his wife, got herself an actual lawyer, and her defense was, I'm a good person who got mixed up with a crook. Sean's defense was, he defended himself, and it was a lot of the sovereign citizen type things. A lot of it was fairly incoherent. Greg Bishop actually went to the trial a couple times, took some notes, and observed some stuff because it was there in Los Angeles. In the end, Morton and Melissa were found guilty, and then what was great was that he didn't show up for his sentencing hearing. The feds went after him, and about 6 weeks later or so, he and his wife were arrested and taken into custody. But Morton, while he was on the lam, was appearing on, I wish I could remember whose show it was, but I'm sure you can find it. And he also was sort of live streaming from his phone as he was in his car driving supposedly out to the desert or someplace. I think they found him in Desert Hot Springs or somewhere like that. In the end, Morton got 6 years in prison, about $500,000 in fines, and paying back the IRS. And then like 5 years of supervised release after he's out. So nothing. His crimes had nothing to do with UFOs really, but he's one of these guys who, sort of between the securities fraud and the tax fraud, has and just the countless bogus predictions over throughout the 90s, selling people a newsletter that has predictions that will make them money if they invest how he says to invest, things like that. The field attracts the field attracts people who use the field to fleece others and make relationships with others in the field, and then move on to other things. But as someone who was always very amused by the fact that Morton, as far as I can remember, predicted very little. His big claim to fame was he predicted, I think, the Northridge quake in California. And I'm sorry, guys, listeners at home, I can predict an earthquake in California. It's the easiest thing to do on Earth. But he's just one of these guys who's been around for 20, 25 years, and where does he end up? Well, in prison for tax fraud. But an interesting story, sort of tangentially UFO. It's a little bit old school.
Yeah.
So maybe some old timers out there remember Sean David Morton showing up on Art Bell several times a year and making stuff up.
Yeah, it sounds vaguely familiar to me, but I don't think I ever really knew who he was. Yeah. Any comments, Mike?
None at all. None
Okay.
at all. I was muted a little bit there so. But none at all. Yeah, no, I couldn't. I didn't follow him. I kind of smelled a rat a long time ago and just ignored him. So.
You see, I smelled a rat and I started paying more attention to him because it was hilarious. So that's sort of the difference there, right? I was like, this guy's clearly crooked. I'm gonna watch him because he's entertaining me. So I'm not on any sort of search for truth here, folks. I'm a student of I'm a patron of the theater of ufology arts, and I'm just observing the madness.
Okay, let's look at the newest Rendlesham thing, which really comes down to Peter Robbins and Larry Warren. I don't know if there's anything else that happened on Rendlesham this year, but Peter Robbins, who had supported Larry Warren for a long time, got a sudden wake up and realized that Larry has been lying to him about a lot of stuff. And it got to the point where Peter not only broke communication with Larry, but he basically told me he's throwing out all the Rendlesham stuff because he doesn't know what he was lied to and what he wasn't lied to about. And he said there's no way to sort it out at this point. And that was such a big force in the whole Rendlesham case was, left at Eastgate. And it caused so much controversy throughout the years with various people saying Larry Warren was lying. And it turns out, at least in some cases, he was.
Yeah. This was, when this hit, was it over the summer, I think? Early summer?
So. Yeah.
Yeah. It was, I read it was sort of, blew up the UFO wing of my social media. And I was like, Peter Robbins, splits from Larry Warren. And I was like, what?
Yeah.
That's weird, because the newest edition of Left at Eastgate isn't that old. And, I bought a copy of it and had it signed by Peter like a year and a half ago. So I was like, wow, what's going on? And I read Peter's statement, and it was just, it's kind of shocking because even and I really do admire the way Peter sort of backed away from the whole thing because he couldn't honestly determine what was true and what wasn't. I think that's a pretty sort of, that's a good integrity-filled sort of stand to take. Because a lot of times, even when you have people who are like, well, my partner is like shady about some stuff, but I'm going to ignore him and like a year and then, sort of ignore that there was any problem. I'm thinking like Kevin Randall and Don Schmidt sort of thing, But this seems like Peter is taking a sort of a much firmer stand, and it's really a blow to the whole Rendlesham thing, the whole Rendlesham case in a lot of ways. Because it was one of those cases you could look at and say like Cash Landrum and all these other cases where you could say, look, something happened, and remove aliens from the equation, something happened here.
Yeah.
And if nothing else, it was a good case for convincing people that the powers that be are not entirely honest about what goes on. Like I said, ignore the alien stuff. There's something strange that happened. People were affected. People's lives were affected. What's the truth? And now, a lot of shade has been thrown on that, and it's a little disheartening.
And Larry was the initial whistleblower for the whole Rendlesham case.
Yeah.
So I mean, he's the guy who came forward and said, "Here's what happened." And other people have since come forward, and someone like Charles Halt has had to, the base commander has had to come forward and address this, and now here's where it gets even weirder. And so Peter, and he writes about it in Left at Eastgate, Peter and Larry go back to the site in Rendlesham, and it's Peter's first time ever at the site, and Larry's kind of saying, "Oh, here's where it happened, and here's where it happened," and I know Peter very well. He's not a liar.
No.
And they saw a UFO hovering above the site. They were recording it, and they had their voices analyzed for stress, and it shows that they're experiencing legitimate stress. So here they are, Larry Warren, Peter Robbins, the two authors of Left at Eastgate, go to the site and see a UFO. Now this is the kind of stuff that I don't know how to say this. I mean, I take this kind of stuff very seriously. I mean, there's a deeper layer of mystery here than just someone's lying.
Well, that's a site where stuff has been seen going all the way back in history. I mean, well before they were called UFOs, they were will-o-wisps and things like that. So, I mean, it's a hot spot for unusual activity anyway.
Yes, the author and the two authors of the book about the site happen to have their voices, they're recording their voices in the moment. I agree. I mean, I don't think everyone that walks there at night sees something. So, but yes, it is a place, it is a hot spot where lots of other people have seen things.
And I know, like, Peter was really devastated by this. I mean, in a way, this was his life's work. And, he kept saying, like how stupid he felt for believing him because, he said, well, I checked a lot of the stuff he gave me. And after a while, I stopped checking as closely because everything else he gave me was true. And he just kind of established that, and he's like, and I didn't do my job. I should have checked everything and I would have caught this. And I'm thinking, all right, you checked enough stuff to make that assumption. I mean, once you think that someone's telling the truth, why, I don't know. And the way he did it, once he realized this, that he, as Aaron said, once he realized what was going on, he just came out and, hey, look, this is the deal. He didn't try to justify it. He didn't try to defend it. He said, I was lied to. And we need more of that.
But, and also there's other witnesses that hold up very well. Something happened.
Yes, absolutely. It's just now, first you had Nick Pope's book coming out, which seemed to muddy the waters a bit. And now you have this, and now it's like, well, is there any chance we'll ever figure out what actually happened there? Like, not just explain what happened there, but like even on the human side of things.
It's always referred to, and this always annoyed me. Britain's Roswell, is sort of the catchphrase. And I think this situation actually does turn it into Britain's Roswell because suddenly you don't know, and there's shadiness that's been uncovered but there are still solid witnesses, and it's clear that something happened and there's documentation, but the waters are muddied just enough that it goes from one of these days we're going to get the final pieces that finally solidify what happened to will we ever get the pieces that solidify what happens? And so it's sort of, I worry that it's going to be in that, hey, who knows? What a weird thing sort of basket. When I kind of held out hope for a long time that this is going to be one of those ones where we can say, look, here it is. Here's this documentation, read this book. It does a great job of explaining all this stuff. And now that's a little more problematic.
And I understand Peter tossing it all out, but there were things that Peter did, like getting the soil analyzed from where they found the circle in the field, and there was oddities in the soil and stuff. I mean, that stuff still holds up.
And that was right where Larry said it, because he said Larry walked into the field and he said it's right there, and they walked right over there, and there was a circle of dead chalky soil. Yeah.
So I mean, and as he said, the early stuff he got from Larry, he checked thoroughly and found out that it was all true. So, Larry wasn't lying about everything. It's just a matter of Peter wasn't going to sit there and try and sort out the lies from truth at this point.
Right. It's the sort of thing, there's a lot of really great pieces, but the cohesive narrative that they had built from those pieces is now in question. And going back and re-examining everything and reconstructing that narrative if necessary, I wouldn't want to do it. That's good grief. I mean, just imagine, it's like, oh, this is what you've spent like a good chunk of your life doing. Yeah, do it again.
Yeah.
Only this time, everybody is going to be on you all the time, with, nitpicking every little thing because of what your research partner was up to. I mean, gosh, I think bowing out is, for his own well-being is probably the best choice.
Yeah.
It's just yikes.
And the smartest choice, really.
I agree.
So, all right. Did anything else happen with Rendlesham? That was really the big thing, wasn't it?
I think so. That's the only thing I really remember.
Okay, so let's ironically let's deal briefly with the fact that it was Roswell's 70th anniversary.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't pay any attention at all to Roswell 70th.
Neither did I.
I did.
And I think that's kind of what it deserves at this point.
Yeah, I mean, the 50th anniversary was the big anniversary because of the entire sort of accretion of UFO ephemera that surrounded the Roswell 50th anniversary, with Air Force reports and Air Force re-reports and denials and rebuttals and all of that. And the Roswell 70th was mostly people on radio shows and podcasts saying, hey, it's the 70th anniversary of Roswell. And I stopped caring around the 51st anniversary of Roswell, I think.
So if you had to make your best guess, Aaron, what would you say actually happened at Roswell?
Something fell out of the sky. And then the Army picked up some of it and drove it somewhere. That's I am confident that happened. And I'm confident that whatever it was safer and easier at first blush for the people at the base to say, yeah, it was one of them flying saucers. And then when that proved to be a terrible cover story, they had to come up with some even worse cover story. And I think whatever it was, I think that the odds that it was an interplanetary craft that became the basis for all of the technology we know and love in the second half of the 20th century, I think that's less likely than almost anything else. I don't know. But something fell out of the sky.
Mike?
Well, we'll get back to this because there's another part of the history of 2017 that we're gonna get to in a little bit, and I'll come back to that. So
okay, all right.
All right.
I tend to like Nick Redfern's theory that it was that it was a test craft of some sort.
Yep, I like it too. I like it. Actually, whenever inevitably students have Googled my name, and they ask me about flying saucers every semester, and they say, well, what about Roswell? And I say, you should read Nick Redfern's books, because that's good stuff. I like some of the suggestions. I'm not going to sort of go full bore secret space program, but I like the idea that what was recovered at Roswell was actually space technology that was human, but that nobody was supposed to know about at the time. I think that's likely too. I like the idea that the Darrows and the Hollow Earth might have been flying. You can't go wrong with Darrows.
That's true. That's true. All right. August 2nd of 2017, Jim Mars passed away.
Yeah.
And he...
Oh, I met Jim a few times at conferences, and I interviewed him, and I actually had a beer with him one time. Oh, and I had lunch with him at one time. And Jim Mars, like, I realized right away, if you were like some guy that was working at the secret space lab or something like that, and Jim Mars sat you down, you would just melt in his presence. This guy was so charismatic and had just the sweetest Texas voice. He could have got me to say anything on the record. So he was so genuinely charismatic. The persona that he has on his podcasts, or like when you hear him interviewed and see him give talks, that was him. And so I just feel blessed that I had the few chances to hang out with him. And there was one point when I was in line. This is at a conference in Laughlin, Nevada, which they don't have the conference there anymore. Actually, it was a big crummy, ugly casino, and there's kind of a restaurant, and I was standing in line at the restaurant, and I kind of got to talking to the person next to him, and she had a story and he had a story, and he was like, well, let's just all have lunch together. And we all sat down together. I didn't say much at all, and I just listened to him. And she was working on a book project. She was doing investigation, and it sounded like a murder on a military base kind of thing. And that's just going back a number of years now. And it was just, so he kind of took her under his wing and kind of said, here's how you got to play this. And he gave her, like, here's how you need to do your investigation on this. Be careful here. Here's the pitfalls. I wish I could, but it was so wonderful to see him just, he was such a genuine guy. That persona that he had with the little Texas aphorisms and everything like that, that was him. He was like that 24 hours a day. It was a joy to be in his presence.
He was folksy. He did a good job bringing the folksiness. I never really read a lot of Jim Mars' stuff, and I think one of the reasons why, I never met him personally, like out on the circuit or anything, but I of course have a copy of Alien Agenda, because they issue it to you at some point when you're interested in this topic. But I was talking to I think Tim Binnall a while ago, and Jim was on the first episode of every season of Binnall's show, and he Binnall sort of said Jim sort of, that was his entree into this world. And I had to look it up when Alien Agenda was written, and it was written in 2000. And so apart from his Kennedy book from the 90s, Mars's stuff all came out after I was already sort of enculturated into all of this. So it's weird. I always sort of saw him as, oh, he's a guy who, he's an older guy, but he just sort of came along working on this stuff. So he was never really on my radar. But there's no denying, just during the from 2000 on, just the amount of presence he had in the paranormal media, in the paranormal sort of media culture, is just amazing. Just the way he communicated with people and connected with people, whether they be readers or listeners, or people in the audience at a convention, it was astounding. He had the air of an elder statesman, even though you'd think he'd been back there with Jim Moseley back in the 50s working on this stuff, to talk to him. But it's just just an amazing communicator and an amazing person who connected with people at a level that few in this field have the ability to do.
I agree, and that was the why I felt so honored to sort of spend that one-on-one time with him a little bit, and the conspiracy culture thing. I mean, the book Crossfire is remarkable. That book is thick. That is a big, fat, thick book, and it is. Every single page is riveting, and he also put this is a little plug. He put out a comic book. Must have been I guess he ran a class in the University of Texas or something out of Dallas or Houston or something, on the Kennedy assassination. So he did a college class, and I think he also taught a college class on just straight up journalism. But he put out a little comic book, thin little thing. It's probably 40 pages long, where it's about, I think it's called Oswald. I can't remember this, but it's about Lee Harvey Oswald. It's an image of Lee Harvey Oswald on the cover, and it basically ties all the threads to Oswald together. So you can kind of, because it's like I'm trying to make sense of Oswald is like entering a hall of mirrors, and he put together this narrative in a comic book where you kind of go like, oh, if you follow his logic, then the Oswald story, there's the beginning, middle, and end of it, and then it's all cohesive. Where any other person would say like, oh, we can only speculate about this here and speculate about this here. But yeah, I should look it up. But that comic book that he did is a little bit hard to find. It's amazing.
Okay.
I mean, he wrote it. He obviously didn't draw it, but it's kind of sloppy. It's not a it's not a graphic novel in the sort of modern sense, but he used the comic book format to tell the story.
Okay, all right. Let's jump into two of the really big things that happened this year. First was the whole To the Stars thing.
Yeah.
So the To the Stars thing, there was a big announcement, and they stood on stage. Now this is coming. I worked in marketing and advertising and stuff for they were like on this podium, and they were like, it had the feel like it was they were like it was like the Oscars or something like that, the Academy Awards there, and there was nobody in that audience, and they were in an empty room speaking to nobody but a couple of cameramen, and but they put out this video, and you can watch it online, and it's kind of, I don't know how to say this, like, I don't know. I mean, Aaron, you must know exactly what I mean. Like, like a Navy pilot saw like a UFO, and then like tracked it and flew and like radioed back, and I don't know. I mean, there's books out that are just full of those kind of stories, and so this is the big revelation that there's some Navy pilot from the Nimitz. Yes, he seemed like a very credible guy, and he's been interviewed since on all kinds of news outlets and stuff like that, but.
Well, that came out of the New York Times thing, didn't it?
That was initially dropped in the New York Times. Yeah, that was. So there was two articles on that one Saturday. Let me just go back to the day it was here. Saturday, December 16th. Yeah. So a little bit over a month and 10 days ago, 40 days ago. And they wrote as straight an article, and this was Leslie Keane and Howard Blumenthal, I think that's his name, right? Yeah. And I can't remember the woman's name. She was the Pentagon reporter, or the Pentagon desk officer, or desk chief for the New York Times that wrote about the Pentagon. So these three journalists, in like the strictest sense of the word journalists, like, and I have to guess that every single word of that was like scrutinized and gone over. They were not going to let that thing go on into the newspaper before they had fact checked and made sure that they weren't talking out of their hat. But this is, I mean, so the article itself if you're at all immersed in the UFO stuff, there's nothing new really there.
No.
But this was the New York Times. Like,
Yeah.
what happened? And it was Stanton Friedman and this was back on Tim Binnall. He said, somebody threw a switch somewhere. I would love to know what happened. But somebody flipped the switch that said yes. And in that so there's two separate articles. One is about the Navy pilot, and the other, and I'm going to read aloud from one little thing here, is from that same article from that December 16th. Okay, so they say Robert Bigelow was awarded the money to do some research, and this is under Mr. Bigelow's direction. The company modified buildings in Las Vegas for storage of metal alloys and other materials that Mr. Elizondo and program contractors said had been recovered from unidentified aerial phenomena. So they're saying recovered materials from unidentified aerial phenomena. So this is exactly what we were saying before. Like, oh, are they back engineering this stuff? And did our smartphones, are they all trace back to the Roswell crash? I can't answer that. But this is the New York Times is like, it is as plain as day. They are saying that they are studying metal alloys from these recovered unidentified aerial phenomena. And then they also say, which is very interesting, researchers also studied people who said they had experienced physical effects from encounters with the objects and examined them for any physiological changes. This is not somebody's blog. This is the New York Times. So there's someone had to make a decision. And then Howard Blumenthal also wrote, this is going back earlier in 2017, wrote a very dry, very straight critique of, it's the book by Cheryl. I can't remember her last name right now. I've actually been communicating with her a little bit, and I asked her about this. The book, and it's a very dry set of statistics comparing state by state the UFO reports, and with graphs and charts. It's straight up data. There's very little editorializing in this book. And he interviewed her and wrote a little essay about a New York Times article about this. And I actually went ahead and emailed him and I said, listen, how did you get this past? I mean, the New York Times editorial board. And he basically said, with great care, it had to be handled very delicately. And so so Howard Blumenthal's been around with the New York Times for 30 years or something like that, and has written a bunch of books that are about gangsters and crime in New York City, and he did a book on Sing Sing, and but he also has been trying to write a book on John Mack and the issues of John Mack confronting the Harvard higher ups. So
I think the New York Times story, yes, it's amazing. One thing that I always sort of need to keep in mind is that the New York Times reported that they were told that there are alloys. It's sort of like, I don't trust the government when they say there isn't anything to all these UFOs. So why would I trust the government when they say we have stuff from UFOs? I assume I'm being lied to by everybody all the time.
Right.
And I think the To the Stars thing, I've got many issues with the To the Stars thing. From Tom DeLonge. I don't know. Do the kids know who he is? I don't know. I don't care. But I guess he's part of some sort of popular beat combo that the young set listens to or something like that. And I think he seems like a sincere guy who wants to do the right thing to get the truth out to the people. And then I saw his interview with Joe Rogan, and I was like, oh, you got to get this guy off the stage. He's he's not ready for prime time.
And that's my sense too, that he's somehow that's their, what do you call it, the straw man. You know, they've like propped this guy up, and he's like they don't have to do much to push him over, right? So,
yeah. You know, and there's that, and then there's, you know, the fundraising, and I got no problem with fundraising. Anybody wants to go raise money for something, go ahead. You know, you need money for your rent, go just ask anybody. I don't care. But if you read the documents that, you know, the disclosure documents about investing into the stars, it's like they've got so much money lined up. Tom DeLonge gets his money no matter what happens.
Yeah.
And when you in quotes invest in this disclosure effort, what you're doing is you're making sure that Tom DeLonge's $250,000 a year guarantee is paid. You've got a stage full of defense and intelligence people who you know, either see a payday or have got some ulterior motive, or are getting a payday because they have an ulterior motive. And at the root of all this is this Elizondo guy, who I don't have any reason to disbelieve, but we are told the shocking evidence, the shocking news that the Defense Department is paying attention to what's in the sky. And, you know, it's like, well, they said they stopped doing it in 2009, but this guy says they were doing it up until recently. It's like,
I would hope they were doing it.
Yes,
I would hope
none of this is earth-shattering. I think the New York Times story had much more potentially earth-shattering information, including the fact that it was published. Actually, the fact that it was published in the New York Times makes me suspicious of everything I read in it. Right.
Well, I mean, I have a friend, and he says, you know, like, it's the only fiction I read is the New York Times, and I know right where it's coming from, you know. So yes, the New York Times is the mouthpiece of the military-industrial complex. If they want to, so yes, we should be very suspicious. But why is it happening now? Why is this big propaganda piece happening now? Who threw the switch? What's
now the switch that Friedman's talking about? Yeah, I think somebody threw a switch. I think somebody threw a switch that said, "Get everybody to look over here. Get everybody talking about this, because over here we're doing something we really don't want anybody looking at." So, what is the switch for? Is the switch disclosure? Is the switch disinformation? Is the switch, it was a slow news week and they had enough to go on to run this? What's the switch for, and who's ordering it thrown?
And then this is directly tied into the stars thing. I mean, that's I mean, all the key players that are quoted in the New York Times article are the same ones that stood on that stage in front of the empty auditorium, you know. So now, and also one of the guy, Jim Semivan, and I actually posted it on my blog somewhere, but I don't know why I put myself through this, but I bought all the books on Kindle, all the Tom DeLonge books. I have not been able to wade through any of it. Have you talked to anyone who's read the fiction book?
No.
Oh my God, I talked to a few.
Secret Machines.
Oh, it sounds
the trademarkable, you know, misspelled word secret.
Yeah. So, and then with the Secret Machine T-shirts and everything like that. Yeah. So, where was I going with this? I was all ready to rant here. Oh, so yes, it's the same players. Like here they are. They're saying we're going to come out with disclosure and we're going to do this monumental thing. And well, a monumental thing happened. There was an article in the New York Times that treated the subject seriously, and you know what it did? It dovetailed so cleanly with the sort of post X-Files conspiracy mythology, you know, that Hal Puthoff says, you know, like, oh, it's imagined that you know, someone found, you know, 400 years ago, someone found the garage door opener, you know, like, what would they do? They wouldn't even be able to figure out what the plastic on the box was, let alone what was on the inside. So yes, I'm so skeptical, but at the same time, I am watching it so closely because I'm trying to figure out, you know, like it's like the magician on the stage, right? You know, they're doing a magic trick where they pull a rabbit out of their hat with their right hand. What's going on with their left hand? What are they hiding from us? At the same time, they're creating this fantastic media display, which isn't that fantastic in the sense that,
and the
stories. Oh, go on. Yeah, I'm sorry.
The thing I noticed is that it really didn't have that much of an impact on people who weren't in the UFO field.
I would say zero. Yeah.
Yeah, because I talk to a lot, I have a lot of people who are not interested in the stuff on Where Did the Road Go? And I would occasionally, I kind of did an informal poll, and I would say to people, did you hear about the UFO stuff? And they'd be like, what UFO stuff? And I'd mention the article in the New York Times, and some people were like, oh, I saw something. Like one person said to me, he saw something about it, but assumed it was fake news and ignored it.
Yep.
Well, it could be fake news. I mean, that's legit. Yeah.
That's a reasonable response.
But for the most part, people had no idea what I was talking about. And I'm like, okay, so the people who already kind of know that this is the case are flipping out about this being in the New York Times. But the people who might actually be like, who wouldn't know this was the case already aren't paying attention to what the New York Times is telling them.
Right. Because honestly, the New York Times story, it makes the most sense to those of us who know who Robert Bigelow is. We hear Robert Bigelow like dude, Robert Bigelow's doing his thing. But to most people, this looked like a one of those feature stories about something that is news-like that they can skip if they don't have an interest in the topic. That's and I think it's one of the things that always intrigues me about, and Bigelow is sort of emblematic of this, is we hear activists and political people talking about the sort of nefarious, private contractor stuff that happens, especially outsourcing military and police and criminal justice and intelligence things to private corporations and private individuals, because there's less public accountability. Bigelow is a great example of privatizing the government UFO cover-up, if I can be so crass as to say public UFO cover-up. It's because anything Bigelow would come up with, that's like his company's proprietary information. You can't file a Freedom of Information request on Microsoft like you can on the FBI. And this is an idea that people have talked about for years, but this is an example of, the government doesn't have time to cover this up, or this is the most banal thing ever, but imagine that budget cuts and reorganization in the intelligence establishment after 9/11, where everything was sort of retasked to the global war on terror. What if there is such a thing, the UFO cover-up department basically gets downsized to one guy who realizes he's got to find, some clever way to finance the continued investigation and hiding of this, and he hits upon this idea of privatization of government UFO stuff, which has the benefit of sort of protecting it from that kind of public scrutiny. It's an interesting thought experiment that also speaks to some of the real, or not real, some of the more pertinent and provable issues that we face in our country.
There's a series of YouTube videos, and it looks like Tom DeLonge is recording them from his phone. There's two that came out within days of the October thing that he did with. Let me see if I can find this here. That he did within the after that, where they all stood on stage, and said a lot of stuff that, in a way, they pulled off the one thing. They got this thing in the New York Times, and it all seems to be who's ever pulling the strings in all this. It ain't Tom DeLonge, and there's two YouTube videos that are worth looking at, and they'd be easy to search out. They came out and he kind of is Tom DeLonge sitting at a desk. And I have to be very careful how I say this, because I'm making an accusation, but I'm going to do it in a way where I'm not making an accusation. Let me just say that he was kind of twitchy, and he was kind of obsessively like rubbing the formica of his desk and touching his nose.
Yes.
And he made some claims that sounded like, you know, the guy going through a mania phase in his, like, when, you know, his pharmaceuticals had, like, I don't know, it was, I'm said too much already. You can watch it and make your own conclusions, but he was not the person. If I was head of the secret government and I wanted to break the news, I could have picked anyone, and that had more credibility than Tom DeLonge, you know.
Which is the point.
I agree. Then Stephen Greer is the same thing. I mean, Stephen Greer just like is as oily as they get. Yeah.
Yes.
He's the opposite. He's like, Greer says everything is bad aliens or good aliens, and Tom DeLonge says everything's bad aliens.
Yeah, but the government's good.
Right.
Yeah, that's the shit.
That's to protect us. Yeah. So
that's the military industrial complex is has our best interests at heart against but you know, on the other hand, you know, if somebody's acting all sort of, you know, twitchy and post-pharmaceutical, is that a?
I don't know. I didn't say that. I'll look more actually. So. Yeah.
But you know, it's a nice little bit of plausible deniability. Well, you know, he's one of these rock and roll musicians. He's probably, you know,
what rock and roll musicians
on the goofballs or something, you know. So you know, that's just part of his lifestyle and charm, and that's what makes him relatable. I don't know. I'm old, so I don't understand the appeal of Tom DeLonge. He just looks like somebody who I would cross the street to avoid. So I don't know.
Okay.
Now Jackson Brown, they need to get that nice Jackson Brown talking about the aliens.
Let's see if we can squeeze these last few things in before the end of the show here. The Mothman sightings in Chicago, although not normally, like for me, that doesn't pop up immediately as UFO, but of course the original Mothman sightings were UFO related. I'm not sure there were UFO sightings associated with the Chicago ones.
No, I haven't followed the Chicago thing much at all, and I know
Chicago ones are interesting. Basically, what I know is there were 50 some Mothman sightings in Chicago. Most of what I know is from watching videos and stuff with from Allison. What's her name? Allison Jornlin. She's investigated every single one of the sites. She's in Wisconsin, Milwaukee area, I think, so not too far from Chicago. Back in December, there was a really good interview that Robbie Graham did with her about these, and she sort of talks about, you know, sort of she's looked at these things and it's like there's Mothman elements, but there's also elements that are just sort of there's some good reports, and there's a lot of reports that are just very dumb. And you know, I saw a thing on a building. Well, we have another Mothman report in Chicago. You know, that sort of thing. So it's, and you know, there's and one thing she pointed out, I was looking at my notes. One thing she pointed out is she hasn't seen any, and I'm willing to be corrected, or I'm willing to have people correct her thing that I'm relating, that there don't seem to be any UFO sightings associated with the Chicago Mothman, which is a sort of distinction from the classic sort of Point Pleasant Mothman. So, and you know, it's one of these things where, just sort of getting semi-folkloric about it, you know, you've got the story of Mothman that's become this legend, and you have then, well, there was a Mothman sighting here, and what people do is they sort of remove Mothman from the context of all the other weird stuff that was going on in the area at the time. There was a whole complex of paranormal stuff. Mothman isn't just some creature that shows up every once in a while. This was part of in West Virginia anyway, was part of a complex of UFO sightings and man in black things and other strange things happening. So with the Chicago stuff, it's a lot of it seems to be sort of, you know, Mothman light in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it seems more cryptid oriented than UFO oriented.
Yeah, which isn't I've established in this last 45 minutes that I am, pathologically old school about stuff. And, Mothman as cryptid is, that's as one-dimensional as Mothman as alien, or Mothman as ghost, or Mothman as whatever. Mothman defies simple explanation. And the Chicago sightings are very much Mothman as cryptid, and that's sort of where the story kind of ends.
So, Mike, when we talked about Roswell, you said there was something connected later that you would make a comment about?
Oh, no, that was exactly what I was saying, that Aaron was saying, like, everything we hold dear came from the retrieved crash, like our smartphones and Velcro and stuff like that. So, so what I'm saying is that the New York Times article says there's a privatized hangar building in Las Vegas that is housing materials that is being studied by Robert Bigelow. Robert Bigelow, was it? Yeah, so that's what I was saying. Yeah, there was that quote that I read.
If you figure that we've gotten materials from unidentified flying objects throughout history, whether it be pancakes, slag, and other residue here and there. I mean, that's, to us at least, to people who research UFOs, that's not earth-shattering. And implants. Look at the implant stuff and the analysis that's been done of those that show that they have really weird mixtures of metals mixed into them. So it's kind of like, yeah, okay, but we already know this,
Yeah.
Unless it's being studied for the so here's one theory of the whole who threw the switch. So one theory is that the aerospace industry knows dang well that there's this stuff going on, and that there's advanced aircraft that's so secret that nobody can talk about it, and they want in on the pie. They want to be able to build their airplanes using the technology that nobody can talk about. So this is maybe a way for them to open the door and implement some of these things into modern aircraft. This is just a pure speculation, but I've heard this bandied about, and that's as credible as any reason. And once again, I'm thinking, the stage magician is wowing the audience, but it's a trick. What's he really doing? What's he doing with his other hand is what I'm more concerned about. So. There's one more thing I was thinking here that Robert Bigelow, I think it was 2017, was on 60 Minutes and kind of did that kind of oh my gosh, of course there are UFOs little speech. And this seems to, my sense is, whoever threw the switch gave, sort of said to Robert Bigelow, like, go ahead and say this, that seemed to dovetail too cleanly into the New York Times article, which came out some months later, to be ignored.
I agree. Am I back?
Yes.
You're back.
Okay, good. Bigelow's gotten a lot of money, and so Bigelow is going to potentially say what he is asked to say. I agree that Bigelow,
and he's never been shy about it. There's an episode going back, probably 7 years ago of him on, maybe 6 years ago, of him on Jesse Ventura's conspiracy theory TV show, where Jesse manages to walk up to him, and this had to have been they had to know that, and the gatekeepers around Bigelow, let it happen. And he said, I was former governor of Minnesota, and I'd like to ask you some questions. And they, on camera, have a little short talk, and Bigelow is as straight as he can be about his interest in UFOs. And so
yeah, that was a Skinwalker Ranch episode, wasn't it?
Part of it was the Skinwalker Ranch, but part of it was also UFO stuff.
Okay. Let's see. There was a few, we can go through these pretty quickly. There were a few science things that came about this year. For one, the Starchild Skull was explained as being human.
I'm shocked.
Yeah, I think we were all shocked. And it was definitely anomalous, and that's what they said. They don't know what was up with it, but the genetics are human. So that was, it was kind of one of those, it just kind of slipped through there. I didn't even see it right away. And then someone pointed out to me, and I went, yeah, all right. And let's see, we have the interstellar object that came into our awareness. I don't even know how to say it. Oumuamua? I don't know.
I saw that in our list of topics, and I was like, I hope somebody else says that first, because
I don't even know what this is. So,
it's an asteroid or something that has floated into our solar system, and they found it. I'm sure it's not the first thing that's ever floated into our solar system, but it's very, very old, and it does not come from our solar system.
Actually, according to Wikipedia, it's the first known interstellar object to pass through the solar system.
Yeah.
Everything else is sort of on a circuit or like a cycle that we recognize, and this was weird. And was this the one that had like some like its composition was strange, had like almost like organic components to it, or something like that. And it's that, and what was the star that kept sort of fading because
Tabby star,
the dust or whatever that occluded it. It's just, there are so many, when people say there's no aliens, we would have, the whole, is it the paradox that says if there were aliens, we would have met them by now or whatever,
right?
Well, you know what, here is a weird semi-organic consisting object that passed through our solar system that we didn't know about. Hey, maybe aliens will be the next thing that we didn't know about that show up. The universe is amazing and fascinating, and just stuff like this, and news that unless it was 2 years ago, but news this year of more extrasolar planets than we ever thought would be around. It's
unless you watch Star Trek,
well, yeah, but those are all in the mirror universe. But it's I think it's a question of when, not if, we determine that there is life elsewhere, and maybe not human life, maybe life we don't recognize as intelligent, which is different from it being not intelligent, right?
Right.
And I think things like the Oumuamua, or
whatever it is.
I think Oumuamua sounds fine. It's actually Oumuamua, I think.
There you go.
I think the more we learn of this stuff, the more we realize that that whatever we discover out there is going to be different. It's not going to be bipedal creatures with a head necessarily.
Unless you watch Star Trek,
Unless you watch Star Trek, right? Because we were all seeded from the same bipedal with a head alien, whatever that Next Generation episode, The Chase, that was it, where they reveal sort of why the special effects can only create aliens that look one way. Sort of a canon explanation for their makeup shortcomings. But that's what it was. It was a whole episode about why all our aliens look alike.
And they talk with British accents,
And they all talk with British accents and have weird noses. But the universe is a strange place. And I think that's the thing about the sort of space science news this year that I picked up on, or that struck me, was all the news that we've seen makes extraterrestrial life seem more likely, not less likely.
Yeah,
which I think is a neat direction to move in. And I think that's scientists saying this. It's not just like people like us.
Yeah, and I think that all this time, I'm just there's. Oh, someone once said that 76% of all statistics are made up on the spot. And there's it's something like 76% of the people believe in extraterrestrial life, which is, I think it's something like that. And that's the kind of number that gets thrown around. But yes, so the majority of people think this and assume it, and just, it's not a big deal to the majority of folks. So the New York Times has an article about, UFOs, and it makes no splash at all. It comes down with a resounding thud, and nobody, except unless you're a nerd on some Facebook page or something like that, is talking about it. So that's remarkable in itself.
It got more press about people talking about how it wasn't being talked about than it did when it came out.
Yes.
Agreed, yeah. Because it was like you'd see all these memes saying something like 2017 was so crazy that the government admitted that UFOs are real and nobody noticed.
Right. Yeah. And
the little boxes that you get on Facebook kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'd be like, well, yep.
Exactly.
Yeah. Actually, I'll be honest, I avoided most of the real news to focus on things like strange objects in our and Tom DeLonge because it was more sane. But
all right. Well, we're just about out of time, so I think we did that pretty good.
Honestly, I thought this year in review would take 8 episodes.
Yeah,
given our track record.
I was worried about that too. I mean, I'm sure we could expand on all these subjects if we really wanted to. But you have a new book coming out, Mike?
Very soon. I have a new book. It's a follow-up to The Messengers called Stories from the Messengers. It is 19 chapters, each with an individual story. It should read like a book of short stories. Aaron J. Gulyas is one of he's footnoted in it. I've quoted him a little bit about when I wrote an essay in the book. One of the chapters is about Kenneth Arnold. Kenneth Arnold had a pet owl, and that was the starting point. And then you read about Kenneth Arnold, and you don't have to scratch too far below the surface to realize that, dang, if he doesn't, if it walks like a duck and talks like a duck, he is walking and talking like a UFO abductee. He said a lot of things that sounds like the kind of things UFO abductees would say. For instance, this is on just a Kenneth Arnold thing. He talks about feeling that when he saw those UFOs, Kenneth Arnold, the guy who coined the phrase or unwittingly coined the phrase UFOs, flying saucer, unwittingly coined the phrase flying saucer. He, when looking at those 9 shiny objects above Mount Rainier in Washington in June of 1947, said that they had entered his mind, that they had somehow entered his mind. It was very distressing. He did not talk about it at the time. He talked about it close to his death.
All right. And where can people follow you, Mike, if they want to keep up with what you're doing?
They can go to hiddenexperience.blogspot.com.
Okay. And Aaron, you have a quite awesome podcast that you started doing.
I do have a podcast. Yes, it's called The Saucer Life. It is, the way I sort of describe it to people is if you've ever listened to Dan Carlin's Hardcore History, it's like that, only about flying saucers and much, much, much shorter and out much more frequently. Think of it as 20 to 30 minute sort of mini UFO history documentaries with primary sources and me being snarky but loving about people like George Adamski. It's you can find it at saucerlife, all one word, .com, and on Twitter at saucerlife. We just finished up our 3rd batch of 6 episodes or so. So we're taking we're not really taking a week off. I just released a little sort of bonus episode that I sort of introduce it, but it's a George Adamski speech from the Giant Rock Convention in 1955. So it's UFO history. We've gotten as modern as actually the New York Times story. I did a little thing about that, but we've gotten as modern as the 1980s. Next up in first week of February, we've got Donald Kehoe being censored, supposedly, on Armstrong Circle Theater back in 1958, the media censoring the UFOs. There's going to be some stuff about an end-of-the-world cult in the 50s that the book When Prophecy Fails studied in depth. We're going to look at the real story, not the names changed version that everybody knows. We're going to look at the real names. We've got some fun stuff coming up. So saucerlife.com. All saucers, all the time.
And I highly recommend it. It's extremely well done. I was genuinely blown away when I listened to it.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, guys. This has been fantastic.
Yes.
Thanks so much.
Well,
yeah, it's a joy to be back. Yeah.
See you next year.
And a special thanks to our Patreons who are pledging at the $10 or above level. John Eddy, Chris Elmquist, Patricia Giaquinta, Allison Cook, Robert Groom, Christopher Sheehan, Roland Belstedt, Kevin Shrek, Super Inframan, Alfred Tuttle, Carla Mahoney, and Gabriel Zero. Thank you very much. You have been listening to Where Did the Road Go? This show is made possible in part from our Patreons, and we thank you and everyone listening for helping us continue this exploration of the strange. You can always find everything Where Did the Road Go related at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And thank you so much for your support.